Hello and welcome to Maid Central Academy. This video is going to cover the master schedule and how to schedule for consistency. In particular, when we're talking about this, we really want to think about our three stakeholders. And within our three stakeholders, we've got our company, our customers, and our technicians. Everything that we talk about at my Maid Central Academy is really to promote these three stakeholders. We want to have each of these stakeholders to have a winning moment in any decision making that we're going forward with. So in terms of the master schedule and scheduling for consistency, we're really trying to think, how does our scheduling decisions affect the company, our customers, and our technicians? So it really comes down to the fact that consistency is key. Whether you advertise it or not, everybody is happier when your technicians are consistent. So for your customers, they're happier with consistent techs because they know who's going to be in their home. It is a place of trust. There's not very many people that we trust coming into our homes, that we give keys to our homes. In addition, they usually have more predictable arrival times when technicians have a consistent schedule, and they have a more consistent quality of service. So they're having probably higher level of quality of service, but also a consistent quality of service, which really reduces the likelihood of customers canceling service. So customers really win when technicians are consistent. Technicians also win when they get to have a consistent schedule. They get familiarity with the homes that they're cleaning. That increases their productivity. And if you're paying any sort of pay for performance model like fee split or allowed hours, that will also increase their pay as well. By having a consistent homes that they're seeing on a regular basis, they also have a higher quality, which benefits the customers, but it also benefits the technicians because it usually increases their tips as well. And when they have a consistent schedule, they usually have more predictable drive times and they can choose better routes, so they can actually shrink those drive times a little bit to increase efficiency as well. And then the final piece of this little win-win-win situation is the company. And the company really comes into play as getting benefits from consistency, that their technicians are happier because they're getting better pay, they're having more predictable days, they're having predictable end times, which is reducing the technician turnover, which helps reduce cost of goods sold because training is by one of the most expensive pieces of our businesses. Our customers are happier because they have technicians that they can trust in their homes on a regular basis, which lowers our customer attrition, which then reduces the amount that we're having to fill that churn of customers kind of leaving us. And overall, we're increasing our productivity and efficiency just by having consistent times in homes and consistent times between homes. So how do we get this? There's a couple of different pieces of this, and it all comes back to the master schedule. So the master schedule is kind of the final piece of this, but all of this kind of works together. So the first part of it is actually home zoning. So home zoning is not just a way to make your schedule look pretty. I do think that colors can be used in many different ways, but that's not actually the main purpose of this. You really want to use your home zones purposefully. You want to use them as a unit of measurement to be able to tell how far apart two locations are by either knowing the name or the color of the home zones. So making them kind of an easy frame of reference. And you do this by making them logically named or color coded. I've seen this done with names a couple of times really well, where they kind of make it gridded like a spreadsheet, kind of A1, A2, B1, B2. Those systems are ones that people have been using for a long time, so their office is really accustomed to them. The other way that I find people able to transition to really easily is actually using colors to define the zones more than names. And actually these colors, the best way to use colors is really by using colors logically. So we already have a lot of color theory that we understand. We like to match colors to each other. We've, been taught our color theory kind of early on, primary colors versus secondary colors. So putting that to use where we don't really have to think too much about it, but we can make really logical, good, efficient decisions with very little effort is kind of where this comes into play. So here's some examples. On the left-hand side, we've got a service area with some home zoning colors where the colors are really in a gradient. We've got kind of this pink and purple at the top that kind of fades down into green, blue and green over to the right-hand side. And this is so kind of along this range, we're going from pink to purple to blue and then to green. And then along the other side, we've got red, orange, and yellow. And what's really interesting here is that we're working with the geography. There is a river going through the middle of this service area that is very difficult to cross. So making it obvious that even though these two areas look like they're close to each other, they're really not. There's a river there, there is a bridge that is not easy to cross. So even though they look like they're close to each other, we made sure to use the colors that they're not close to each other. The pink and the yellow are not near each other. The same thing over here, the green and the red are not near each other. And so the only thing that they have to know off the top of their head is that the pink and the red are also not near each other. So now what we can see is that each one of these groups is a particular size. They can tell what houses are near each other pretty easily and what houses are far from each other. Now on our other example here, we've got a couple of areas that make a lot of sense. Up at the top section here, we've got this green area where we're going from kind of a lighter green to a darker green. That makes a lot of sense. If we have a home in the light green area and a home in the dark green area, we know that we're crossing one zone to get to that dark green area. Now, where this kind of starts to not make so much sense with their home zoning is we actually have these two sections that are yellow, and these two yellow sections are really far away from each other. So if we have two houses, one in each of these zones, without knowing where those houses are located, just by color association, we might think that they're close to each other when really they're not. So in reality, we might want to change probably this one down here to another color, more sense in relation to the zones that it's nearby. Same thing with the orange one. We've got an orange section here and an orange section here that are not really near each other. So we would want to adjust the colors so that it kind of makes sense where this one is probably more of a dark yellow, right? And this one maybe is probably more of a dark red. And just switching those two might make this service area a little bit easier to make logical scheduling decisions without knowing the entire service area. So you can do this with your home zones as well. And where we kind of recommend starting is looking what zones are kind of furthest from each other. With MaidCentral, we use zip codes to kind of create those zones. You can combine zip codes. So over here, you can see that these are actually all the same color, but they're multiple zip codes being added together to create one zone. To make it about the same size as some of the other larger zip code areas. You can do that as well, where you're kind of trying to create a unit of measurement, right? Where some areas might be a little smaller than others and some are a little bigger, but you can combine smaller areas together to make them about the same size. And sometimes it might be more about getting the drive times that make more sense. So even though the zip code itself might be really large, the drive times might be really easy because it's really unpopulated. Or the zip code might be really small, but the drive time might be really large because it's a really populated area. So taking that into consideration kind of helps as well. So if you're doing this for yourself, you really want to look at what zones are farthest from each other and kind of what direction your service area is kind of the longest. That way you're going to want to go whichever direction is kind of the widest is where you're going to want to go color direction. So, or color theory wise. So in this example, we went red, purple, or red, pink, purple, blue, and green across this service area because it's a little bit longer this way than it is up and down. Then the next thing we did with this service area is we went from light to dark. So the dark is on the outside and then the light is on the inside. And we just kind of organized it that way. So now if we are looking at a home in if we're looking at a home in kind of this pink section, we know without having to make very big, without having to map it out or put homes onto any sort of mapping platforms or anything. So if we have a home here in kind of this pink area, we're able to tell without mapping anything out what houses are near it based just purely off of colors by going, one color darker. We know which one is touching it. One color light, one color difference up is red or purple or a lighter pink. So it really helps just to know that you can kind of have every zone is related to the zones next to it. And you can make really rational decisions without having to know exactly where the home is located. I will be adding these tools, links to these tools as well, but we have a color wheel from Botanica that I really like to use that has some really pretty colors and then a color dropper tool as well. So now that we kind of have an understanding of how to use home zoning, colors, and really understanding the importance of consistency, let's talk about the permanent versus active schedule. So our permanent schedule is our recurring customers. This is where our financial security lies. So we really need to prioritize it. Typically, when we're talking about recurring customers, we're talking about our every week, every 2 week, or every 4 week customers. We really aren't thinking about every 3 week, If you're still offering tri-weekly services, I heavily recommend trying to push those people into every 2-week or every 4-week because it will really help in terms of giving consistency on with a master schedule. We'll understand more of that in just a little bit. But ultimately, when we're talking about our permanent schedule, we're talking about the fact that yes, customers can skip and they can reschedule, but ultimately their recurring schedule is not being adjusted when one clean is changed for some reason. Your permanent schedule needs to have rules and it needs to have some guidelines for your team to be able to follow to maximize overall profits for efficiency and productivity. Your active schedule is going to be something like your job schedule or your day-to-day calendar. This is your daily jobs. It is including all of the jobs and resources that are available on that one day. It includes all of the jobs that have skipped or rescheduled, plus any one-time work that is scheduled on that day as well. When we're looking at the master schedule, this is your permanent schedule. It's a way of organizing all recurring jobs by team and day of the week. In MaidCentral, this is kind of an example of this. So on the right-hand side here, we've got a example of a single team's schedule for one day of the week, right? So we're looking at team 8, Amy and Patrick. They have, I'm not sure what day of the week this is, but we'll say it's Mondays. So on week 1, on Mondays, they clean the Haley house and then the Bollinger house and then Bowden. And then on the next week, on Monday, they clean the White house and then the Bollinger house and then Langmore. And then the week after that, Childfield, Bollinger, and then they have an empty spot. And then the week after that, they clean the Haley house, Bollinger, and Langmore. So what we can see here is that our monthly jobs take up only one spot on this rotation. Our every 2-week jobs, our bi-weekly jobs, cover 2 weeks of this rotation, which is why we have it arranged this way, where our odd weeks, week 1 and week 3, are combined together, and our even weeks, weeks 2 and weeks 4, are combined together so that our bi-weekly homes can be shown as a single block on this kind of schedule. And then our weekly services cover all 4 weeks of this rotation. Essentially, what we're looking at here is that one of these houses could skip a clean or reschedule a clean, but on the master schedule, they stay here. So maybe Childfield skipped their clean on 5/29. On the master schedule, they will still show up here because that is their permanent spot. And yes, on 5/29, they're not being cleaned on that day, but 4 weeks later, they are getting cleaned on that day. And we don't want to promise that spot to another customer we don't want to promise that spot to another customer because it already belongs to another customer. So ultimately, it allows us to make day-to-day changes without changing our recurring plan and really helps us prevent double bookings. This is showing us our recurring services on a master schedule like this. There's lots of variations that you can look at this in. In spreadsheet form, it might look something like this, where you have kind of your teams broken down. Again, combining your bi-weekly homes together so that you can see what the total looks like. So you can kind of arrange all of your houses together by team and by day of the week and kind of calculate all those out. Here's a closer example of this, or another example of this kind of in spreadsheet form. So here we've kind of broken this down by day of the week. So this is Monday. And you can see these are all the same because this is just as an example. This will be a resource available to people if you don't have MaidCentral yet. This is a tool that you can use this as a way to create your own master schedule. So each day of the week has its own tab. And then there is a little tab here where you can say how many maximum hours you can have on each team per day. And then we do have a link here on how to use this, which is just kind of a video on how to use this. So feel free to use this because this is another way of creating and using a master schedule. It's not as easy to use as MaidCentral, which just kind of creates it automatically for you. But it is just really important to have some sort of way of maintaining a permanent schedule for consistency's sake. And whether you use MaidCentral or not, there is a lot of value to be created by creating something like this with a master schedule in spreadsheet form and maintaining it on a regular basis. So that's kind of where we're on to next. How do we maintain a master schedule? It's actually really easy once you kind of get into the groove of it. So the first step is coming up with a regular weekly maintenance schedule for it. So the easiest way to do this is to set your schedule on a weekly basis. So in this process of setting your schedule, typically you're doing this somewhere near the end of the week for your next week. So on Wednesday, Thursday, usually Wednesday or Thursday for the next Monday through Friday period, or Sunday through Saturday period if you do work weekends as well. Only moving jobs that have to be moved. That's typically because a technician is unavailable to clean that job. If you work in teams of 2 and one technician is unavailable, but the other technician is available, then your priority is actually to keep the houses with that single technician that is still available and moving another technician to help them finish all the jobs that are created there or that are needing to be cleaned there. Anytime that you are moving a job that has to be moved, try to keep as much consistent as possible, whether it's the time of day or the day of the week. Do not move anything else at this point. You're not moving anything else for efficiency or for any other reason. You're moving as little as possible as you can. Next step is taking into account any permanent changes that you can make. If there are any changes that should be permanent, you're making those while using the master schedule as a guide. So this is something like if you have a new customer that was scheduled that was put into one spot on the master schedule, but maybe there's a better spot. They haven't met their permanent team yet, and we want to get them into a good permanent spot where we're not going to have the desire to move them off of that spot constantly because there's a better spot for them. We're going to make that change now before they get to meet their permanent team. So that's something that we're able to do there. Or maybe it's something like a team has turned over. They're no longer working with us anymore, and we need to get them a new permanent spot anyways because their regular team doesn't exist anymore. So that's another permanent change that might need to be made on during this setting the schedule process. Now, this is probably the hardest part for schedulers is do not touch the schedule again until you have to. And that typically is going to be the day before or the day of when that cleaning schedule comes into play. So something that we really see as that happens kind of in a bad habit of schedulers is that they're constantly touching the schedule and manipulating the schedule to try and make it as efficient as possible. And in that process, they're actually messing it up and making it worse. The more that you touch it, the more that you mess it up. And the reason that is because you're messing it up for the consistency's sake, right? The more times that you're moving things around, you're moving the technician away from customers that are normally cleaning them. That has negative effects on consistency of quality, of arrival time, of day end time for your technicians. All of those things that we talked about at the beginning of this video are all messed up by touching the schedule more than it needs to. So the goal here is to touch it as little as possible. And it does take some time to get used to this. And it will take more time to set the schedule at the beginning as you're starting to kind of create the master schedule and move things into permanent spots and create permanent schedules for your technicians and your teams. But once that kind of gets created after a couple of weeks, really the only things that you're moving are just the anomalies, the things that are not normal, technicians that have the day off or rescheduled homes. Other than that, you really shouldn't need to move anything because everything already makes sense based off of home zones, based off of what colors kind of go together and what teams are cleaning them. So now that you kind of have a routine on how to maintain things, now we're going to move into how do you measure this? How do you know if you're doing well? There's a couple of different measurements here that you can kind of keep track of to keep an eye on whether you are really working well with your master schedule or not. The first one is going to be your schedule efficiency, and this is more of a company schedule efficiency and not your technician efficiency. So your schedule efficiency really depends on your team size. For solos, we're going to see this kind of between 90 to 95% on a schedule efficiency side. For teams of 2, we're going to see this drop a little bit between 75 to 85%. And for each person that you add to a team, you're probably going to see that drop about 10% per person. Your schedule efficiency is going to be your total scheduled hours, allowed hours, divided by the total scheduled clock hours. So if you start to see that kind of drop out of that range, then maybe your home zones are not really where we want them to be, or we're not scheduling the time breaks between houses the way that we want them to be. So that's kind of the first indication that maybe some of our rules are not what we want them to be, or we're not enforcing the rules that we have in place to maintain a master schedule the way that we want to. The next measurement that we might want to pay attention to is our customer attrition, specifically tracking how consistent the technicians or teams were for canceled customers leading up to their cancellation. This could be a quarterly project or a monthly project looking into the canceled customers for that time period and just seeing of their last 4 or 5 3, 4, 5 cleans, how many technicians did they see? How many teams did they see? How consistent were they? And really kind of getting an idea that if they had been more consistent, would that have had a positive effect on maybe reducing their likelihood of canceling their service? Really paying attention to customers before they cancel too. if they're not having good consistency leading up to a potential cancellation. Final one here is going to be your technician turnover, and that is going to be when technicians do turnover, how quickly are you able to get them a mostly consistent schedule? So if a technician turned over, did they have a consistent schedule? Did they have a permanent schedule? Did they have something on the master schedule that was their own? And how often were they actually seeing that happen? Had they been with the company long enough for that to happen, or did they leave too quickly for that to happen? You'll notice here that of our three stakeholders, customers and technicians are both shown here in the measurements and the KPIs that we're looking at when checking to see how well we are maintaining a master schedule. And that's just because that consistency piece is beyond important when looking at how well we are maintaining our master schedule. So I hope this helps. And if you have any other further questions, definitely let us know. Otherwise, we hope to see you in our next one.